Hello everyone, welcome to the first micro lecture of the semester, the origins of storytelling. The goals of this lecture are twofold. First, I'd like to explore the social, cultural, and psychological value of storytelling. And secondly, I'd like to accomplish the ridiculous task of covering about 13.5 billion years of history, and then situate the history of human storytelling within that broad timeline. And this lecture is by no means exhaustive or comprehensive. It's meant to give you a large contour view of the kind of arc of human history and situate our current selves within that. So with that, we will get started. The first point that I would like to convey is that we are all storytellers. Yes, you are a storyteller, whether you think of yourself as one or not. And to be human is to tell stories. You've probably been telling stories since the time you can remember. And one of my earliest memories is swimming in a local swimming hole with my dad, and I feigned drowning. Pretended like I was drowning, flailing and going under the water. He comes in and saves me, and I say, haha, he's joking. And he tells me, never cry wolf. Tells me the story of the boy who cried wolf, and you're probably all familiar with this story. And so that moral, the lesson, stuck with me. The boy who would always cry wolf, that the wolf was coming for the sheep. He would continue to cry wolf until one day the wolf came and nobody believed him. So the moral of this story is don't lie. Simple as that. So within each story, there's usually a moral or a lesson. And think about it, storytelling is one of the few things that separate us from the animal kingdoms. It allows us to reflect on the past and conjecture about the future. Many animals do communicate, even bees communicate using a figure 8 dance to convey the direction of the hive. So very simple organisms like bees do communicate, but no other animals as we know it can tell stories. So to be human is to tell stories. And what you have in front of you is a simple story. And all of us are able to decode this story visually. So this is an example of visual storytelling. And there's many layers and levels to this story. There's pop cultural references, and there are pretty ancient archetypes when it comes to fairy tales. All right, so several fairy tales, princesses that you may be familiar with. And it's also mapped on to the recent show that is a Korean hit on Netflix called, I'm blanking on the name. It is called Squid Games. Squid Games. So if you look at the first couple frames, right, it's telling a simple story. Right? You have a close-up of a princess, and then all of a sudden something happens. Right? The perspective is flipped, and we are seeing something through the perspective of the protagonist, as it were. So this is a simple story that is communicated visually. All right. In this class, you're going to explore visual storytelling. You're going to explore oral storytelling, using your voice to tell stories. All right. You're also going to be exploring interactive storytelling. So storytelling that involves the audience somehow. So let's move on to the next point, where we're going to look at an example of how stories impact us psychologically. So I will start by discussing a seminal experiment, a study in human psychology and storytelling that was conducted in 1944 by a set of researchers, Fritz Heider and Marianne Simmel. And in this experiment, they created a very simple stop motion animation. Participants were shown the stop motion animation. It was 34 participants in total. And this animation consisted of a large triangle, a small triangle, a small circle, and a stationary rectangle that moved about the screen. All right. And so participants were just simply asked to describe what they saw. And out of the 34 participants, all but one described the shapes in terms of anthropomorphic terms. What I mean by that, they gave them human attributes. So they described the small triangle as the protagonist and kind of described this protagonist in terms of some kind of hero's journey, that it encountered the antagonist, which was the large triangle, and attempted to save the small circle. So I've shown this experiment to many students in my classes and asked them to describe what they saw. And on the next slide, you will see some of their descriptions. The point of this study is that as humans, we narrativize. So we give inanimate objects narrative features of characteristics as heroes and villains, and describe things in terms of a heroic journey. There have been many other experiments that describe the social and cognitive and psychological importance of storytelling. For example, a 2008 study this looked at reading of supernatural events in Harry Potter, and they found that reading Harry Potter activated regions of the brain such as the amygdala and insulin. So those regions associated with fear and activation of fear. Another study showed that narratives could increase levels of oxytocin. So listening to a story can release a hormone that is called the bonding hormone that's also released during breastfeeding and when you hug somebody. So storytelling can increase social bonding. A third and final study that I will discuss was just conducted in 2021, and they found that people listening to stories in different rooms, absolutely separate, synchronize their heart rates. So the heart activity of listeners increased during those moments of conflict and decreased in those moments of resolve or resolution. So sometimes you're not aware of the ways stories are impacting you psychologically, physiologically. But next time you watch an advertisement, next time you watch a film, next time you read a book, just pay attention to your heart rate, pay attention to what's going on in your body. So these are some of the responses to the animation that I referenced in the last slide. And these are all student-generated responses, students similar to yourself. So one student wrote, "A large triangle left the safety of its box to defend its home from an invading circle and smaller triangle. After some battling and escaping, the enemy shape flees, and the hero triangle breaks his box home out of rage." So it describes these shapes in terms of human characteristics, human emotions, uses very descriptive adjectives, describe simply shapes that are moving around on a screen. I'll show you another one. "I saw 3 different shapes and the 2 triangles were battling it out." All right, so described it in terms of a battle. The circle is its kind of its own little world, trying to go into the box and eventually going into it. I also saw that when the shapes were near the door to get to this rectangle, it opened so the shapes could go in. We see there's similar responses over and over again. So similar to the experiment, almost everybody described this animation in terms of anthropomorphic terms. This is giving these shapes human emotions, human characteristics. So what does this say about storytelling? Again, we are all storytellers, and we strive to make sense out of the world through stories. So I'm going to ask you to complete a similar assignment in discussion 2.1, where you watch the animation by Heider and Simmel and describe what you saw. So make sure that you do that by the end of the week. So now I'm going to switch gears a little bit and take you on a journey through time and space. And every good narrative has an origin story. So our story begins with the Big Bang. So, to give you, a student of storytelling, I really zoomed out, wide-angle perspective of where we stand in time. We go back to the beginning of this story, 13.5 billion years ago, the Big Bang. So, we don't know much, but we do know that about 9 billion years passed before the Earth was formed, and another 1 billion until the first life forms emerged on the planet. So for billions of years, the only creatures to roam the Earth were single-cell organisms. Slowly, over time, life became more complex, first with the evolution of multicellular organisms, then invertebrates. Dinosaurs roamed the Earth, and we could talk about dinosaurs for a long time, but I will move through very quickly. Dinosaurs roamed the Earth, and then abruptly go extinct about 2.5 million years ago. The first hominin, considered by many to be humans' modern earliest ancestor, evolved in East Africa. So there you have it, about 11 billion years of history in less than 2 minutes. So now we're going to step into our time machines and go back to a distinct period of human evolution in which we can trace the early contours of the storytelling mind. So I want to discuss a distinct case, and this goes back about 350,000 years ago, and that is of Homo naledi. Homo naledi are considered early ancestors of modern humans, but they're also thought to be ape-like, more ape than human. All right. Recently, it had been found that Homo naledi had carried their dead deep into extensive cave networks. All right, and this took quite a bit of effort to bring their dead into these caves. So it's an early sign of ceremonial burial, the earliest sign that we have in our fossil records. So what does this suggest about Homo naledi? Some type of mythological imagination, perhaps a belief in the afterlife. So this shows kind of early contours of a storytelling mind, storytelling imagination, to be able to think of the world in the future, to think of an afterlife. All right. About 200,000 years ago, we see the evolution of Homo sapiens, all right, which are modern humans. And these modern humans had learned to harness the technology of fire, use rudimentary tools, also showed evidence of ceremonial burials. So there's increasing sophistication that's going on, increasing social coordination with regards to hunts and gathering of humans who share resources. So as you can see, this necessitates pretty advanced and sophisticated communication, and storytelling an essential piece of that. So next, I'm going to walk you through sort of successive revolutions in storytelling in human communication. And the first revolution begins with the spoken era and the evolution of rudimentary languages. And this occurs up for debate again around 100,000 years ago. The numbers are very fuzzy because this is prehistory. We have no written record. Right? There's no signs of texts or literature from this area which we can deduce anything about timelines. So in this era, of course, we know very little because, as I said, prehistory, no written record. And this is because that language leaves no physical trace. Based on our best guesses, the earliest languages were most likely onomatopoeic. What does that mean? Onomatopoeias are words that sound like the thing they reference. So think of woof being a dog, bang, pop, boom. I believe the word wolf probably, this is my own theory, probably originates from the word woof, right? So Woof being a dog, all right? So that's about as much as we know. But we do know that language is a requirement of complex social societies. And as societies, as human society became increasingly complex, language was adopted as a means of distributing resources, settling disputes, passing and sharing down knowledge in terms of how to make tools, all right, how to operate early technologies like fire and things like that. So in about 2 minutes, that is the spoken era. So the next revolution in human storytelling occurs around 45,000 years ago with figurative art and the explosion of visual storytelling found in caves and in statues around Asia and Europe and Africa. So going back 65,000 years ago, we do find abstract markings and symbols such as handprints in Altamira, Spain. But we don't find figurative art. Those are depictions of hunting scenes, rituals, and daily life. And that goes back to 45,000 years ago in a site in Indonesia. And what sets this apart is that there are attempts by humans to represent and imagine the world around them. I'd like to point to a very peculiar case, which is the Lion Man statue, which was found in Germany and dates back to about 32,000 years ago. So the Lion Man figurine is a wooden sculpture. It's a chimeric creature, meaning it has human body parts as well as animal body parts, and is considered one of the most significant archaeological finds ever. So what is so significant about this artifact, you ask? Not only is it considered the first indisputable example of art, but is also a lasting testament to humans' ability to imagine things that don't exist. So humans' ability to imagine things that don't exist. So this is an early example of what we call kind of science fiction, right? Fantasy. So putting a lion's head on a human being, these are creating new creatures, new fantasies, new stories, imagining a world that doesn't exist in the world that we know. So I think that is a very significant development in the storytelling imagination. The next revolution in human communication and storytelling begins with the advent of rudimentary writing systems. So why did humans begin to develop early writing systems? So around 12,000 years ago is the agricultural revolution. So before that, groups were made up mostly of nomadic tribes, and then they start to shift to a more settled agrarian way of life. So society relying on agricultural needs to plan ahead for planting, harvesting crops. They need accounting systems to keep track of trade, food sales, etc. And at the same time, these early civilizations were developing class systems that required documentation to record successions of kings, emperors, dynasties, and that further necessitated the spread of written symbols. So ancient civilizations such as the Sumerians, Egyptians, Greeks, Chinese began to record more stories on clay tablets, papyrus, and other materials. And at this time, the religion also became more complex, required a new kind of literate class of clergy and ruling elite. So literacy and ability to write and read was limited to the privileged and in society, and in turn, writing didn't threaten the influential place of oral storytelling. So I want to go back to the Sumerians, who may have learned about Sumerians in history class of Mesopotamia and the city of Uruk, which lied on the Euphrates River in modern-day Iraq and Iran. By today's standards, this is a small city, 50 to 80,000, around the size of Holyoke, but in that day, that was a massive civilization. We do see in the society early signs of pictographs, which are symbols to represent concrete objects. So symbols that have kind of a one-to-one representation of the object. And oftentimes they look like the object, so it doesn't require a whole lot of literacy, right? So barley, beer, other resources that were important at the time had symbols to represent them. And fun fact, many of the earliest records that have to do with the sale of beer. Around 3000 BC, we see the development of cuneiform on clay tablets. And these are as a writing system that is pressed into clay. Cuneiform comes from the word cone, and there were small little wedges that were pressed onto a tablet, oftentimes to convey records of resources and trade and sales and things like that. And phonograms represented a sound. So this required a certain form of literacy. These are more abstract symbols. So the symbols become increasingly abstract and require a kind of advanced literacy to be able to decode them. Not too long after, we see the Epic of Gilgamesh. So we start to see this sign system being used to record very complex stories with heroes and epic journeys and so forth, which comes in the Odyssey and other seminal works come pretty soon after. The Egyptians pretty simultaneously developed logographic writing. And these are signs that represent words. So you think of the hieroglyphics are logographic writing systems. And if you think of logographics still exist to this time. Think of a no smoking sign. All right, this is something that can be read pretty universally across languages, across societies. At the same time, the use of papyrus facilitated preservation of records and was very portable technology that could be used to share knowledge across pretty vast distances. And it could be used to store information. Think of the Book of Dead, which is a pretty seminal Egyptian text. The Mayan is a logosyllabic. It's a combination of logographic writing with syllabic. So it took a pretty long time to decipher this code. And then also, pretty soon after, the Chinese invented paper, which is a pre-requirement for another significant development, which is the development of the printing press. This is fast-forwarding pretty far forward in history to 1440 AD. And the printing press, Gutenberg printing press, is a movable printing press which facilitated the spread of knowledge through the mass production of text. And you think about what this does, it leads to more widespread literacy. You can store knowledge in libraries. You can make knowledge and text portable. It facilitates the spread of religion. The first book to be printed, of course, was the Gutenberg Bible. And for a long time, that was the most widely distributed text. All right, so a lot more can be said about writing and its influence on storytelling, but I will end this lecture here. The next lecture will be discussing the advent of digital formats in storytelling. So we'll dive into radio, television, the internet, etc. All right. So again, this was by no means meant to be an exhaustive lecture. This is a very rough sketch of our timeline in human history as it relates to storytelling. All right. So I will leave you there, and let me know if you have any questions or comments on this lecture.